9/11, how you reflect back this 11 years later, where we are, where we were.
Well, it's been an awful deterioration. You know, the most retrograde forces within American society have used the specter of the war on terror or terrorism in the same way the most retrograde forces within American society used communism or anti-communism to crush any kind of legitimate dissent or any questioning of the structures of power. The collapse of the Soviet Union left an ideological vacuum. These people only define themselves by what they are against. They used al-Qaeda, and however horrific the attacks of 9/11 were, they never posed an existential threat in any way to the United States. And we have watched in the last 4 years the Obama administration further erode civil liberties. I would argue that Obama has carried out far more egregious assaults against civil liberties than even George W. Bush, whether that is the refusal to restore habeas corpus, the FISA Amendment Act, which retroactively makes legal what under our Constitution has been illegal, the warrantless wiretapping, monitoring, eavesdropping of American citizens, the use of the Authorization to Use Military Force Act to justify the assassination of American citizens, the use of the Espionage Act 6 times to shut down whistleblowers in this country, essentially ending any kind of serious investigative journalism into government war crimes and malfeasance, and of course the National Defense Authorization Act. We sued the president over this issue. Judge Catherine Forrest in the Southern District of Court of New York issued a temporary injunction, and we are now waiting to see whether that will become permanent. She should rule very soon. All of that has been used to essentially, in this reconfiguration of American society, which is really the heart of this book, into an oligarchic state, a neo-feudalistic state. You criminalize dissent because they know very well what's coming as they reduce roughly 2/3 of this country to subsistence level. The awful logic of where we're headed. You know, you see the forces of economic power, of corporate power, telling workers in this country that they have to be competitive in a global marketplace. That means being competitive with prison labor in China or sweatshop workers in Bangladesh. And we just saw the great labor advocate Mr. Islam being murdered by, obviously, opponents of any kind of labor organizing. They work 22 cents an hour, $37 a month. That's the world that we are headed for, and it comes right back to the Chicago strike because none of the established systems, formal systems of power, including the two political parties, are going to help us. And that was the importance of the Occupy movement. It essentially stated that fact. We're on our own now.
Days of destruction, days of revolt, you started before Occupy.
Yes, because it was an understanding that unfettered, unregulated, unchecked, unimpeded corporate capitalism knows only one word, and that's more. They commodify everything. Human beings are commodities. The natural world is a commodity that they exploit until exhaustion or collapse, and we see that with the melting of the summer Arctic ice, 40% gone. What is the response of our corporate overlords? It's to raid those waters for the last fish stocks, mineral, oil, natural gas. It makes Herman Melville's Moby Dick the most prescient book in American literature. It's utterly suicidal. These are all Ahabs. There's a quote, I think Ahab says, you know, my means and my methods are sane, my object is mad. It's utter insanity. And if we do not wrest power back from these corporate forces, if we do not reverse this corporate coup d'etat, they will quite literally kill off the ecosystem on which the human species depends for life and force all of us in this downward race to the bottom. So that the conditions of workers in Immokalee, Florida, begin to replicate the conditions of workers everywhere.
We just have zones. How does this strike, Chris, fit into the story you tell in this book?
It completely dovetails with everything Joe and I have been reporting on for the last 2 years. What happened in these sacrifice zones has already taken place. A complete disempowerment a destruction and impoverishment of these incredibly poor pockets, largely invisible within the United States, and the assault that has been carried out against Native American communities on reservations, against the inner city. We report a chapter out of Camden, New Jersey, per capita the poorest city in the United States. These tactics are now being visited upon the rest of us, and that's why the teachers' strike in Chicago is arguably one of the most important labor actions in probably decades. If it does not prevail, you can be certain that the template for the attack on the union will be carried out across the country against other teachers' unions and against the last readout of union activity, which is in the public sector, of course, firemen and police. That's already happened. Since we wrote the book in Camden, they fired the entire police force. Camden is not only the poorest city per capita, but one of the most dangerous because they wanted to break the police union, which they have done.
This is in Camden,
New Jersey. And so we went into these sacrifice zones to show what happens when families, individuals, and communities, as well as the environment, are forced to kneel before the dictates of the marketplace. And what you get is personal, economic, and environmental devastation. And now these forces, these corporate forces that have made these sacrifice zones prostrate themselves before corporate profit, corporate greed, are turning on the rest of us as we rapidly reconfigure this country into a neo-feudalistic society, an oligarchic state. And it is, I think, emblematic that the reptilian heart of the Democratic Party is sort of represented by the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who has, like, as far as I can tell, all major Democratic figures turned their backs on the union activity and the struggle on the part of the Chicago teachers, including, of course, Barack Obama.
You know, it's interesting, right now, the questioning of the corporate media, why have the teachers waited till this point? Why didn't they negotiate before? But I saw Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, in Charlotte, North Carolina that week for the Democratic Party.
Well, the tactic is clear. The Secretary of Education, Duncan, is behind it. And that is essentially the stripping away of qualified teachers. We're watching it in New York. The mayor of New York is very much a part of this effort. The assault on the New York City Teachers Union is as egregious as the assault against the Chicago Teachers Union. And it really boils down to the fact that we spend $600-some billion a year, the federal government, on education, and the corporations want it. That's what's happening. And that comes through charter schools, it comes through standardized testing, and it comes through breaking teachers' unions and essentially hiring temp workers, people who have very little skills. This is what Teach for America is about. They teach by rote. And they earn nothing. There's no career. I mean, there's quite a difference between teaching people what to think and teaching people how to think. And corporate forces want to teach people what to think. It's a kind of classism. People get slotted. It's vocational. And so I see what's happening in Chicago as one of the kind of seminal uprisings of our age. And if they don't succeed, we're all in deep trouble.
Occupy movement that led to so many encampments around the country. Do you see the Chicago Teachers Union as similar, igniting a fire under teachers around the country?
I hope so. We have seen rallies in New York. I think what's important about the Chicago movement, and we just heard an explanation of that, is that it rose up in defiance of traditional centers of power, including centers of labor. And that, of course, parallels the Occupy movement. For me, when the Obama administration, in a coordinated effort, shut down the encampments, and the last chapter of our book is Days of Revolt. It's written out of Zuccotti. It exposed its hand. a rational response. This is something Paul Krugman, in column after column, asks for in terms of our economic crisis. A rational response to the injustices and grievances that have been visited now on tens of millions of American workers and their families would have been a moratorium on foreclosures and bank repossessions, a massive jobs program, especially targeted at people under the age of 25, forgiveness of student debt, a rational health care program. We know the Obama administration very cynically killed off the public option, but that didn't happen. I mean, that's what happened in the New Deal. That would have gone a long way to dissipating the unrest that is now inevitable. Instead, the security and surveillance state stepped in to physically eradicate these encampments. It's always the ruling class that determines the parameters of rebellion and resistance. And the Chicago strike illustrates the bankruptcy of both traditional labor and the Democratic Party. And that's why the Occupy movement was so important. Whether it reconstitutes itself as Occupy, whether what comes next even calls itself Occupy, is, for me, not relevant. Occupy was a tactic in the same way the Freedom Rides were a tactic, and I see what is happening in Chicago as intimately linked to the Occupy movement itself. It's community-based. It is fighting both political parties that have sold out to corporate interests.